Hello everyone, buckle up for the new CyberPeace podcast episode on India and China relations. Today we are excited to have Dr. Sriparna Pathak, an accomplished speaker, joining us.
We can't really have cooperation. We can't really have trust. So, unfortunately, the relationship is very abnormal. We have the demographics on our side. Then it has to be careful and partner with like minded countries against the established norms of the current international order. But China is actively changing those norms. But
Right.
here, China is very tacitly changing the rules. You can't repay the debt, you give up your sovereignty. China always talks about management of the boundary. It doesn't talk about resolution as we do. How much of benefits have BRI projects really brought to our South Asian partners? That's a very important question. One debt trap diplomacy has already happened. It's played out in Sri Lanka. So the mountain, if it's Asia, it cannot have two tigers. It cannot be China and India. We all talk about countering terrorism. Does China talk about jihadi terrorism?
Dr. Sriparna Pathak is an associate professor and the founding director of the Center for Northeast Asian Studies in the Jindal School of International Affairs of OP Jindal Global University, Haryana, India. She also serves in the capacity of the Associate Director of the Jindal India Institute. Welcome to the CyberPeace podcast, Dr. Pathak. How are you doing today?
I'm fine, thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you. It's great to have you. So before we start off, with the main focus on India and China's ties, I would like to ask you, as a respected academic and associate dean, as well as the director of the Center for Northeast Asian Studies at Jindal Global University, a renowned university in India. Could you please share insights into your experience within the field thus so far?
That's a great question and a great way to kick off the podcast. And thank you for bestowing so much of respect on me. As a China scholar, life is easy and difficult. Just as a faculty or as a professor of China studies, I see that there's a lot of interest in China, which I didn't see when I was a student myself, and in different aspects of China's rise, be it economic, military, digital warfare, cyber warfare, and so on. So there's a lot of interest. So thankfully for me, I have a lot of takers for all my courses every semester. So that's the good part. That's the positive part. But when there's so much of interest, then one also has to ensure that one gives out the right picture and is factual and is objective. So that takes a bit of work. Being a China scholar is a bit of an uphill task because you need to know the language. It's an additional advantage if you've lived in that country for long, not as a tourist, but as a common person over there. You've seen how life unfolds there. I've done a PhD in China studies, so it's been an uphill task, but I would say it's been worth the effort.
Okay. So moving on to the main aspects of the podcast. So as an expert in Chinese foreign policy, how do you perceive the relationship between India and China?
Our relationship right now is abnormal at best, because even though there's been disengagement that has happened at the borders, it's not de-escalation. Our armies are still holding ground. And sovereignty is of importance to every country. It's definitely of importance to India. But the military aspect is just one aspect of the relationship. Even though India and China have so-called civilizational ties, Buddhism, etc., in every aspect, unfortunately, India and China have not been able to leverage the full potentials of the relationship. Even if you look at economics, there's a plethora of tariff and non-tariff barriers against Indian products in China. While at the BRICS or SCO, which are seen as the great tools of leveraging multipolarity, Asian bonhomie, and so on, China says often that, the West doesn't give them equal market access. But it's guilty of the same as far as India is concerned. I'll just give you two examples. India is known for, agricultural products. One might say that typical Ricardian comparative advantage is there. China produces high-tech goods and so on. India produces agricultural goods. So be it, fair enough. India does try to send agricultural goods. But then, if you look at basmati rice, which is India's patent, which is India's, China chooses to import it from Pakistan over from India. How and why? Because it says when India tries to export basmati rice, it says there might be these 10 pests in your basmati rice. The funny thing is, 7 out of those 10 pests are not found in India, they're found in China. So this is a non-tariff barrier. This is a politically motivated barrier. Okay, India is known for its generic drugs. We are the generic drugs platform of the world. Even in the most bureaucratic, democratic countries of the world, be it the US, where there'll be so many parliamentary debates, discussions, or Europe, our medicines make way in less than 3 to 4 weeks. Whereas in China, which is a one-party state, things should have been easier. Our generic drugs keep languishing at ports for 8 to 9 months at a stretch. What happens to medicines after that? They expire. So it's a double whammy for us. We engage, of course, we put in costs of production, which we can never reap because those drugs are old now.
Right.
And there are many more such products. This is the economic realm. Then there is water. Brahmaputra River, which is the Yarlung Sangpo in Tibet, gets weaponized very often. There's a weaponization of water.
Right.
Despite having a agreement on sharing of information on the volumes of water flowing in the upper reaches of Yarlung Sangpo, China often weaponizes it. When the Doklam crisis was going on, China did not share data. And that was one of the years when Assam had the worst floods because we didn't know what hit us, And so on. There are many more such plethoras. I can go up to, I think, at least 20 such realms. So unfortunately, we've not been able to reap the benefits of being neighbors. And the ball is in China's court. And it can rectify a lot of these things. But for whatever reasons, it has chosen not to.
But could the floods be the reason for the weaponization, indirectly or directly?
So what happened in 2017 was that India has always asked for the information how much of water is flowing in the upper reaches of the Brahmaputra or Yarlung Sangpo. So China said that year that the weather monitoring systems in Tibet have failed due to extremes of weather, which is okay, which is understandable, which can happen. And we didn't know how much of water is flowing in, so we couldn't prepare. Assam anyways has bad floods. And then this comes in and it hit us really bad. And a lot of lives were lost, cattle and so on. The weird thing is Bangladesh got the information from China because it also has an agreement.
Yes.
So if the weather monitoring system fails, it fails for both the lower riparian states, not for one, which is in a conflict with China, whereas it's okay for the other. This statement, which was made by the then Bangladeshi foreign minister, can be found in open sources. They said that they got the data. So clearly there's a weaponization. So, even in a thing such as water, we can't really have cooperation. We can't really have trust. So unfortunately, the relationship is very abnormal. It's very abnormal. It's not just in the military domain. It's across all domains.
Okay. So in terms of economic development, in what ways can both the countries collaborate to address the common economic challenges such as supply chain disruptions and sustainable development?
See, again here, China, because of its reforms and opening up of 1978 under Deng Xiaoping, became the manufacturing platform of the world, and every country in the world, almost every country, has a trade deficit with it, including us. China has leveraged its rise as the manufacturing platform, and it created all these supply chains. Every country is reliant on China for supplies of everything, almost everything. But the supply chain disruptions are happening because of problems within China, COVID-19 disruptions, trade war with the US, and so on. So now, because these disruptions are happening, countries and companies are increasingly looking to move away from China. And there's this China plus one strategy, which is done by mostly business groups, trying to move the supply chains away from China and looking at other Asian countries, be it Vietnam or Malaysia or India. So given that there's this active scramble to find out other supply chains, India can actually leverage its position right now, given that India is at the highest growth rates in the world right now. 8%, I believe, in the last quarter, 6 point something this quarter. So India can really leverage to its own advantage. Again, how does India-China economic camaraderie happen over here? Look, China won't want the supply chain to move away from it because economics is what gave it the power to be this military or this superpower, major power. Superpower won't be the right term. This major power in international relations. It really won't want the supply chains to move away from China to Vietnam or to India or to Malaysia. So which is why it will try everything in its wherewithal, which is a logical thing. I guess every country would do it. But India has to be careful because every country has to have a rational foreign policy. If it is India's time right now, because we have the growth rates on our side, we have the demographics on our side, then it has to be careful and partner with like minded countries, be it in Southeast Asia or in the West.
Okay. So how do you see, China's intrusion into, let's say, Africa at present, regarding the African scramble that's happening and the debt diplomacy?
So, Africa is one continent which before the COVID-19 was poised to be the next game changer. But unfortunately, COVID-19 happened,
Right.
which has origins in China. And a lot of African countries' growth rates actually fell because, like every other country, Africa was also scrambling to find out how to invest in its own health infrastructure. So, then what the African countries really wanted was debt relief from the major countries which do give them debt. China was one of them. China, in a lot of cases, either stayed silent or refused to restructure the debt, which caused additional problems. China has a huge sway over the whole African continent. I've been to a few African countries in the last few weeks. There's a huge Chinese presence over there. Even Bretton Woods systems or Bretton Woods institutions, IMF, World Bank, have been repeatedly saying that there's a huge possibility that these countries also fall into the debt trap of China. And then what happens is a very difficult scenario. We've already seen it unfold in South Asia, in Sri Lanka. And there's a bartering of territory after that, of sovereignty, which again is against the established norms of the current international order. But China is actively changing those norms because of its debt.
It's becoming more dominant in terms of its sway in the international.
Absolutely. Right. So, for example, Sri Lanka has leased out its Hambantota port for 99 years. Who's going to live on for 99 years? For all practical purposes, it's China's. Use different words, but basically capture territory. And the norm, as per, when we do lending or borrowing, the norm is that if I can't repay your debt, I don't have to give up my sovereignty. That's an established norm. You don't play around with sovereignty. But here, China is very tacitly changing the rules. You can't repay the debt, you give up your sovereignty. So China slowly and steadily is also gaining more territory, more access. The same things are unfolding even in Africa. It's mineral rich. China is also tapping into the minerals.
The stadium diplomacy for that.
Absolutely. So it's got huge economic influence, huge economic sway over African countries. Also helps China at the UN. Whenever there are these, discussions at the UN's level on human rights, or even on Taiwan, or even on Tibet, China has this sway, economic sway over a lot of countries. They will toe the political line of China's. So helps it politically as well. Economically, it's helpful. Politically, it's helpful. How do we deal with this challenge? First of all, do we see it as a challenge? How many countries see it as a challenge? Not many, unfortunately. So it's going to be problematic from here on, unless countries which believe in a free and open Indo-Pacific, a rules-based international order, can start thinking of ways how to counter this challenge.
Right. There is this famous saying by this former Maldivian president where he states that China has grabbed more land without a single bullet than the East India Company. So it's true in that case.
It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Not a single shed of blood has been wasted. So
right. So coming back to the trade policy. So how do the trade policies of India and China affect their economic relationship, and what implications do these policies have for regional stability in Asia?
Again, look, right now China's economy is not doing well, even though it says it's around, its official statistics say it's around 4%, 4.5%. Independent analysts or more rational analysts like the Rhodium Group have put it at 1.5%. There's a huge crisis. Last year, the Chinese state had even stopped publishing data on youth unemployment. This year they started republishing it, but with certain tweaks to the whole calculation. That's how severe the problem is. There's a real estate crisis, and the problems are just endless for China. It needs to ensure, because it's an export-led growth pattern. It needs to ensure that while it's undergoing domestic restructuring, it still has access to foreign markets. After the global financial crisis, its two most important markets, US and EU, no longer had the absorption capacity for Chinese goods.
Right.
Now, if its goods are not going out, there's an oversupply problem within China. That's also something it has to grapple with. What does it do from here on? BRI comes to the rescue because it's not just an economic project, it's a strategic project.
Right.
It taps into the markets of developing countries, Africa, Latin America, Eastern Europe, South Asia. If the goods cannot be absorbed by Western countries, there are other options, and China will create the links so that the goods reach there. It also wanted India because in the original BRI plan,
Right.
if you see the map, there was a port which was thought of by China at Kolkata.
Right.
But then the Indian government, just
Didn't
like
join.
the American government and the Japanese government, did not join. And our concerns were huge because in addition to there being a lack of clarity on what goods is China going to send to India, there's also a sovereignty question because the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is an integral part of the BRI, cuts through Indian sovereignty. Right now, China wants the Indian market because it's huge right now, which is why there's a lot of tacit posturing by China. Again, moving a bit away from the wolf warrior diplomacy, which you see till last year, trying to talk about, there are so many South Korean or American EVs, Japanese EVs on Indian streets. Why not Chinese EVs? Those sorts of things. They want to leverage the Indian market.
Right.
But India is still not opening up in the ways that it had before the Galwan crisis. And this is not just because of military or political calculations. It's also to safeguard India's own Make in India.
True.
If in any case China flushes the Indian market with Chinese goods, almost everything is made in China over here. But if India right now is trying to leverage the Make in India, is using Taiwan's expertise for the fabs, for semiconductors, getting China in a huge manner is not going to work. Since I mentioned the China plus one strategy, this is something I observed in Vietnam when I was there, about again 3 weeks ago. Because Vietnam is also trying to leverage China plus one strategy. It's looking at investments both from the US and from China. It's saying that we don't want to get in a political tussle between the two. Now, the weird fact here is that China is driving the China plus one strategy in Vietnam. If you look at the total amount of investment Vietnam received in the first 6 months of this year, 29.1% of it comes from China. Why is China doing that? Vietnam is a huge market. US and EU have slapped at least 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs, solar panels, and so on. Now, if Chinese investment can produce those goods in Vietnam and it goes on a made in Vietnam label, it can still be exported to the West. Right? China still gets its profits. It would want to do something similar to India. But why? How and why would it work well for India, which is trying desperately for a Make in India, which is trying desperately to reduce its trade reliance on China? Last 2 years, US was our largest trading partner. This year, we signed the India-EU FTA. Doesn't work well for us again. We need to move away from this reliance. But China would want to leverage the Indian market the way it's leveraging Vietnam or other markets. So, which is why there's this narrative coming out again that India, China should economically cooperate. But even in the last so many years, how has the economic cooperation really helped India? Do we have Chinese supply chains? Have we had technology transfer from China? Nothing of that sort has happened. If you look at even 2021 statistics, total FDI, out of the total FDI India received, Chinese investments, Chinese FDI represent just 0.3%. They want to invest in our sensitive sectors, which is not okay with us. If we are the recipient country, we get to decide. That's the normal thing, right? But China wants to get into sensitive sectors and not invest in the sectors which we are okay with. So it's not working out for us. Really, it's not working out.
The thing is to always be self-reliant for India. That's the best thing.
Either be self-reliant or go by case cooperation with like-minded partners. Japan, for example. Japan is the only country in the world which is investing in Northeast India. And it has always done so. Look, Japanese and Korean companies have been investing in India since the 1990s. So much so that Hyundai, Samsung, etc. were and are household names. Partnering with like-minded countries, India has done quite a bit even in South Asia, along with Japan. Even in Southeast Asia, there is a collaboration between the US, between India and Japan in stabilizing. Given the fact that India is rising, given the fact that India wants to position itself as a net security provider, we need to look at opportunities.
Right.
Where it's not working out with the West or with Japan, then we can obviously say no. But collaborating with partners where interests work for us should be the way out. Even in the outgoing presidency, the Biden administration in the US, there's a plethora of agreements, economic and technological, signed with India, as compared to economic and technological, bans or tariffs slapped on China. We need to leverage this opportunity. There'll be a vacuum which is created because there's not enough supply from China. So these countries will look at other sources. India can become an important node. So it's important to understand and rationally think of our foreign policy right now.
So moving to the, the economic competition further. So how might the economic collaboration and competition between India and China shape their ties in the next few years?
The competition is going to be really high in the next few years as, China is going to do its own domestic restructuring. It's trying to move away to a services-led industry and so on. While that happens, it will try to still leverage other markets. Indian market, definitely, yes. There's going to be a tussle. Coming to the BRI, a lot of times, a lot of analysts say that the BRI has failed. It has not yet failed. Two things to note over here. It is Xi Jinping's pet project.
Yes.
It's been written into the constitution. Xi Jinping, again, has a projection of being a man in power. He is not going to lose face by saying that the BRI is over. So BRI is in the constitution. Xi Jinping will not lose face. So the BRI, where it's not working out, is being repackaged. There's digital BRI.
Obviously,
Green BRI.
Yes, he brought back the Silk Road to life in the 21st century.
Yeah.
So, yes.
So BRI is not going to go away anytime soon. That's going to be problematic because it creates humongous debts in our neighbors and abroad. Our neighborhood matters to us primarily because it's our neighborhood and we need a stable periphery. So as this unfolds in the next few years and as India tries to leverage its own economic growth, its own advantages economically, its own demographics, there's going to be a huger competition. China's first and foremost target to keep India in check, will be the boundary.
Yes.
If you look at the official speeches, China always talks about management of the boundary. It doesn't talk about resolution, as we do. The differences in word tell us a lot. We are thinking about resolution. They are talking about management. What does management mean? When you have to manage the boundary, you will need attention, economic resources, men, women, personnel into managing the boundary, which we could have used to focus on our economic growth otherwise. So we get tied down to the boundary, right? That is one thing. Second, tying us down to our neighborhood. Constantly create debt traps in our neighborhood, constantly create issues, political, economic, plethora of issues in our neighborhood and keep us tied down. Otherwise, rationally, India is going to follow China's path. The way China did its whole reforms and opening up of 1978, India could very well do it. And then maybe India could be the next China. So why would China want that? It's also a rational actor. It won't want a competitor. So it's going to get very problematic and competitive. So Indian foreign policy needs to start thinking, and we've already started thinking.
Right.
So unfortunately, I have a pessimistic view of the future from here on.
Okay, it could be the land grab, the sea grab, or the health Silk Road, what you mentioned, or the Arctic Silk Road, where China is making its forays. So all these become very, significant in the next decade.
They do, because also look, India is trying to position itself as one of the leading proponents against climate change. Even in Baku at the COP29, we were heavily critical of the West's very paltry sum which was given to us. And we called the West out. And we said that $1.3 trillion is required on an annual basis at least. Whereas China didn't really call it out. It made a very subtle sort of statement. It is engaging in a lot of activities in the Arctic, in the Antarctic, which are also adding to climate change.
Yes.
China is one of the two biggest polluters in the world. So this is another challenge which is going to be a humongous problem for India.
Mm-hmm.
China claims to be a developing country, right? But at the same time is almost as big a polluter as the US is. How do we deal with this dichotomy?
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be problematic even in this realm.
Okay. Even the icebreakers, for that sake, in the Arctic.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So, what factors could influence the future diplomatic ties between India and China in the coming decade?
See, diplomacy's primary goal is to ensure that we still have a manageable or a friendly relationship.
Right.
So the diplomacy is going to continue. We also have so many working groups to manage the border, and India would want the border to be stable. So the diplomacy is going to continue, but it has to be smart diplomacy. China also engages in a lot of smart diplomacy. India is also picking up in the last 10 years, last 10 to 12 years, and so on. Diplomacy is going to keep going on, but India has also to ensure that the ways in which China engages with South Asia, our partners, our neighbors, we have to keep an eye out for that. I'll give you just a few examples.
Right.
I already mentioned Sri Lanka, right? But the cases are not much different even in Nepal. There's a huge fear. IMF has also said that Nepal might fall into China's debt trap. BRI. Even though India is Nepal's highest trading partner, China has its BRI. Now, the BRI, the full document or the full text of the BRI in Nepal hasn't been made public, which is why Nepal's civil society, media organizations have been up in arms, saying that, are you bartering off Nepalese sovereignty? What exactly is going on, right? Even though Nepal signed on to the BRI in 2017, 7 years on, the text is not out. So even their own people, Nepalese people, are not very sure what's going on. Now, 7 years later, none of the so-called BRI projects have yet been completed. China claimed last year that the plans undertaken by Nepal in creating infrastructure in the Pokhara International Airport was actually part of the BRI, and China has finished it. So even the Nepalese government, Nepal's foreign minister, NP Saud, had clarified that no project has been implemented under the BRI. This is China's approach. The recipient country finishes the project, China tries to take the whole claim and the credit. And in fact, their foreign minister, NP Saud, had said that PIA, the Pokhara International Airport, does not fall under the BRI initiative. Nepal has been very unpleased with the slow progress of these projects, be it the Damak Industrial Park, the Kerung Kathmandu Railway, all of which China has committed to construct. Progress has just not been made. The fact is, 2 of the proposed BRI hydropower projects were handed over to India. During former Nepali Prime Minister Pushp Kamal Dahal's visit to India in June 2023, there were these 2 projects, namely the Tamor hydroelectricity project and the Fukot Karnali hydroelectric project. They were awarded to Indian companies. But India doesn't play this up. China makes these humongous announcements about how the BRI is going to be a game changer, sustainable development, etc. But as if you just look at the Nepalese case, nothing has been completed. India gets the projects. India, in fact, undertakes a lot of projects. India completes the projects. At least this has been the case in the last 5 to 7 years. Earlier, we had a bad reputation for not completing projects on time. But if you look at 5 to 7 years, last 5 to 7 years, we have been completing our projects, be it in Nepal, be it in Sri Lanka, be it in Maldives, be it in Bangladesh.
Right.
But the narrative is different, which is why our neighbors and our friends in South Asia see China as the better partner. We don't advertise. We probably believe, there's that Hindi saying which roughly translates into do good, but don't try to claim credit for it. I think that mindset needs to go away. Otherwise, China wins the game over here without doing anything much. Even in the case of Sri Lanka, their President Dissanayake is in India, was in India till yesterday. The foreign minister also was there, and there was a talk by him yesterday in which he profusely thanked India for being the first one to lend a helping hand when the debt crisis happened. China lands these countries into debt crisis. India has to help. India will help because this is India's neighborhood. These are India's friends in South Asia. We have political issues, but that's how democracies are. Democracies always have problems with each other. But we were the first ones to lend a helping hand. Their foreign minister thanked India profusely, even yesterday. Said India also undertook a restructuring of loans. Was the first one to do so, right? But we again don't play this up. Our media doesn't, our academia doesn't, our government doesn't. The question here is why not? We'll have to move a bit away from this, strategic culture of ours, which comes from our personal cultures, wherein we don't, blow our trumpet and talk about the things that we've done. We don't need to go the China way, wherein before completing things, China blows its trumpet and says, look, we are here, we've created stability. But for the things we have completed, we need to make it available publicly more often.
And the media should play a role in
Media should do it. Our government also should do it. We put out the details on the Press Information Bureau, but that's not what the world reads. Usage of new media, social media, cyber tools, things which China does. We also have a plethora of those and better ones than China's, but we are not leveraging them.
That's very important. It's not just about, it's about smart work.
Absolutely.
And so how has China's BRI initiative impacted its foreign policy towards South Asian countries?
Again, all our neighbors, except with Bhutan, because it doesn't have formal relations with China, all of them have signed on to the BRI, right? How much of benefits have BRI projects really brought to our South Asian partners? That's a very important question. If you look at Bangladesh, even a few years ago, just 2 to 3 years ago, Chinese managers, they killed Bangladeshi laborers, right? Because there was a dispute. Chinese laborers, wherever they go, be it in South Asia or in Africa, they don't respect local laws, religious laws. Now, in democracies, these are things which matter to people because we have our religious freedoms. We have our religious rights, be it in India, be it in Bangladesh, be it anywhere. Democracies. So, Chinese laborers do not understand that sort of religious niceties. They step on the toes, and to the extent that they even kill Bangladeshi laborers. This was a Chinese manager. But then, there was a lot of hush-hush things which happened, swept under the carpet. The Chinese person got booked, but then he was sent back to China and so on. This is the sort of sway they have. Now, when China signs on to these BRI projects and says we'll get in investments, what do we think goes through the minds of the countries which are recipient countries? Every country wants development. So infrastructure creation, first and foremost. Now, to create infrastructure, getting that money from China, of course, these countries will have to pay a certain amount of interest. What is the rate of interest, though, which China wants? It's not really clear. There are a lot of overhead costs which keep increasing over the years for these developing countries. And these developing countries have to pay more and more and more and more and more. Pay through their noses to China. China is benefiting here. Even though China talks about win-win, it's just one-way win. Second, countries hope that employment will be created when China comes in with these projects. But China gets its own laborers, right? That's happened even in South Asia, be it in Nepal, be it in Bangladesh, be it in Sri Lanka, be it in Maldives, every single where. So local employment is not being created.
It's Chinese.
It's Chinese employment.
I've heard, that the Chinese government sends its prisoners overseas. Is it true? Is what I've read.
I've read some of those, but I won't be surprised.
Okay.
That also could have a grain of truth. So, but then again, see, it's creating employment. Even if it's a jail person, even if it's a prisoner, that person also has to be given some sort of labor, right? So, sure, why not? So, Chinese laborers generally don't respect local laws, local legislations, local rules. They end up getting into tiffs, political fights, etc. Even if you look at China's all-weather friend Pakistan, how much of benefits have BRI projects really brought? It really, how many projects have been created? China wants the CPEC to continue, but if you just look at OSINT or open sources data as well, very often China says we will not give you further debts because there's corruption in Pakistan, etc. Then again, it decides that no, we have a common enemy, there's India, and then ends up giving loans, etc. So it's constantly back and forth. In Balochistan, where there's a humongous resistance to Chinese CPEC, constantly there are terrorist attacks. And I think at least 5 to 6 have happened just in the last 2 years. So much so that now China is saying they will send their own security forces. This goes against the sovereignty of any country. How can another country's security forces be deployed in a country? But Pakistan, because again, it's not being a very rational player, it's blinded by its animosity towards India, is openly bartering its own sovereignty. And its own media has been calling it out. China leverages these advantages over here. China benefits at the expense of our South Asian partners. India, again, has to counter this. I don't know how exactly, because there has to be a blueprint. First and foremost, by popularizing the projects that we have done, the differences in our approach. You will not see India taking, even when Indian companies invest, they don't take Indian laborers there.
Yes.
They employ local laborers there. This is the hugest difference. We create sustainable models of development in whichever countries we go. Even when we extend lines of credit, and here I'll invoke Sri Lanka again, China just gives debt. And when the country is in debt, it asks for help, it extends a further line of credit, creating more debt. When Sri Lanka was in distress, not only did we extend a line of credit, we gave, for example, certain goods like fishing nets. For us, for India, these are sunken costs. We can't go and get fishing nets back. Why did we give fishing nets? We understand that the primary source of employment in that island country is marine resources, is fishing. People would need that. So a people-centric approach. We also gave in aid or medicines to counter malaria. We are also a South Asian country. We know malaria is a problem, especially in coastal regions. It's a sunken cost for us. We can't go from home to home in Sri Lanka and say, give us back the money for the, medical aid which we gave to prevent malaria. These are people-centric approaches. We do these. This is the difference in India's approach and China's approach. We don't talk about this. First and foremost, this needs to be done. Pakistan, maybe the lesser said, the better. We can keep that at bay for a bit because it's not really working out for us.
Yes.
But for our other partners, be it Nepal, be it Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka is so hugely thankful to India. The first visit of President Dissanayake after he took oath, after he took office, is to India. That shows a lot. This is the point when India starts to leverage all of these. Maldives even though the Maldivian leadership came on an India Out campaign, he has been to India. He has been talking about how great a partner India has been. There's a need for us to actually start building the narrative, putting out facts as to how India's approach is different from China's. Otherwise, China gets economic benefits from our South Asian partners, sucks economic blood out of them, gains political advantage, and creates our neighborhood and keeps our neighborhood as messy as forever.
Right. So, taking this into consideration and, considering China's sharp diplomacy strategies, could we say that China will be the next neo-colonial power in the 21st century? Do you agree?
It already is. Unfortunately, it already is. Even though, look, China is also a post-colonial society because at one point of time, at least 8 powers, had divided China into spheres of influence. So China also should understand the pains of colonization. They don't use the term colonization because of their whole perspectives and their approaches to foreign policy. But that being said, they do understand how it feels. And that's why it becomes even more important that a post-colonial society doesn't end up doing the same sorts of things. One debt trap diplomacy has already happened. It's played out in Sri Lanka. Why on earth would a post-colonial society morally feel that it's okay to capture another country's territory, even though it's saying that it's been leased out? Again, as I said earlier, who lives for 99 years? For all purposes, that territory is China's, right? A post-colonial society, look, I know that there are no morals in international relations, but China claims to be a better player than the US or the West and says that it's not a colonial power or that it's a developing country, it's a voice of the global South. But then it's ending up doing the exact same things which European countries, at least for us, have done in the past, which colonizers have done in the past. just repackaging it in a different way through debt. They're already doing that.
Right.
So, for all objective purposes, China is already a colonizing power, even though it's not reached the echelons of power which the US has at the moment, but it's already doing it. So when it, if and when, if it ever does, take the place of the US and becomes the leading player, it's only going to do much more because it's already doing it currently as the second most powerful country of the international system.
Could be even the Caribbean islands and
Absolutely.
the surrounding islands, So so moving to the implications. So what are the implications of China's expanding military presence in South Asia for regional security dynamics? Is China the primary threat to India's security?
Absolutely, yes. It is a security challenge because it's not just about creating problems at our own borders, but also creating messes in our neighborhood. Currently, there's a lot of turmoil in Bangladesh. There's no elected government in place. There's an interim government. The first military contact which has been made amidst all of this shuffle and all of these changes was not by the US, was not by India. It was by China. A military ship has already docked. So China is going to take advantage of any sort of changes, political changes, economic changes which happen in our neighborhood. And that's going to just keep the problems high for India. It already has tried that in Sri Lanka, Maldives, and so on. It uses sharp power. It leverages AI. It engages in disinformation against India. So it uses all sorts of tools which it has at its wherewithal against India. Look, there's a saying in Chinese which which translates into English as one mountain cannot have two tigers. So the mountain, if it's Asia, it cannot have two tigers. It cannot be China and India. So it will do everything to keep India in check. Militarily as well, it will keep fomenting issues. Coming back to Pakistan, even though terrorism is a non-traditional security threat, that is such a huge challenge for India because we've suffered terrorism again and again and again, state-sponsored terrorism from Pakistan. But who's the boogeyman or the boogeywoman behind Pakistan? China repeatedly blocks India's bids at the UN's 1267 committee to enlist Pakistan-based militants. Even though the other P5 members will support India, have supported India, US or France or so on, saying that yes, they have been terrorists. China puts a technical hold on that. What is a technical hold? China doesn't care to clarify.
Right.
It pushes India's northeast also has been problematic.
Yes.
This terrorist outfit of United Liberation Frontiers of Assam, or the ULFA, the head, Paresh Barua, is sitting in Yunnan in the PRC in China. A lot of illegal arms flows happen from China's Yunnan to Bangladesh's Cox's Bazar. At least under the previous government in Bangladesh, we had been able to curtail some of that. We were also able to collaborate with Myanmar to curtail some of that. But China has created messes again in our neighborhood. How do we deal with this challenge from here on? So there are going to be more messes in our northeast. Even in Manipur, a lot of Chinese-made arms have been found amidst all this turmoil. So basically support Pakistan's state-sponsored terrorism, block India's UN 1267 committee petitions in our northeast, continue supporting our terrorists, house Paresh Barua. Paresh Barua constantly keeps giving out these YouTube sermons as to how Assamese people should be more pro-China and as to how China has helped Assam and so on. Narratives, of course. What has China really done? It's not like India doesn't talk about these things. We do. There are some things don't come out in the open domain, but there are backdoor channels. What has China really done to address our concerns? In the SCO, at the RATS, we all talk about countering terrorism. Does China talk about jihadi terrorism? That's of primary concern for us. Jihadi terrorism comes from Pakistan. It's not going to talk about it. So even using this non-traditional security threat, it will keep India tied down. It knows terrorism is amongst the biggest challenges which India faces. Because we have Pakistan, we have our own homegrown terrorists, we have Northeast and so on. So it's going to be problematic. China has a lot of tools at its disposal. India has thought of quicker or smarter ways to deal with them, but we have to be constantly on our toes and partner with countries which think in a like-minded way as India's. leverage the US wherever it can be leveraged. Well, the US has also suffered terrorism. Why not use it? Israel, wherever we can, and so
Right.
on. So, utilize like-minded partnerships.
Japan and South Korea, involve
Japan's
them in
absolutely in the economic
the development
Yeah.
of Northeast. That's good
yeah,
in a way.
absolutely yes.
Yeah. So before we wind up, I would like to ask you the last question. What message would you like to give for CyberPeace?
I think CyberPeace is doing quite a brilliant job because you're at the intersection of international relations as well as the cyber world. You all are talking about cyber diplomacy. You all are talking about cyber security. You all are looking at newer domains which become challenges not just for India but for democratic countries worldwide. Disinformation, misinformation, usage of AI, the cyber world, cyber hackers, cyber tools. These are newer challenges which traditional thinking might not be able to counter. So I think CyberPeace is doing a great job, and I think you all should continue doing the amazing job that you all are doing. And thank you for doing the brilliant job that you're doing.
Thank you so much. All right, ma'am. So it was great having you, and we wish to have you back again. To talk more about new topics, new issues. So maybe the next podcast.
I
sometime,
would
right?
love
Yeah.
to be here again. It was so amazing talking to you. And it's an honor, absolutely, to be here and discussing so many things. So, thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of the episode. Thanks to Dr. Pathak for joining us in discussion on India and China relations. For all the foreign affairs enthusiasts, we hope the episode was beneficial to you. As always, thanks for listening to the CyberPeace podcast. Thank you for watching our show, and if you found it informative and engaging, we kindly ask that you like and share the video to help us reach a wider audience. We look forward to welcoming you back next week for a brand new episode. Until then, this is Dr. Preeti signing off. Thank you for your support.